My name's Don, and my wife's name is Carla. We've been married for 8.5 years now. Together, we have an 8-year-old son named Steve and a little daughter, Lori, who's 4. Yep, you guessed it, Carla was already expecting when we tied the knot, so Steve came along just 6 months after our wedding day. Honestly, none of our friends or most of our family thought it was a big deal that we got married because of the pregnancy. The only ones who really had an issue were Carla's mom and dad. They were definitely disappointed in their daughter, and they made it clear to everyone that the blame rested on me. I was the one who led their daughter down the wrong path, the guy who got her pregnant, and according to them, I ruined all the chances she had for a bright future. I've never lived up to the man they pictured for their daughter, and honestly, I probably never will. They see me as the guy she had to settle for. Can you imagine how that makes a guy feel? It sure didn't feel good. The thing is, they aren't wrong about the facts. I did convince Carla to take that step with me, and yes, I was her first. All of that's true, but what they don't see is that Carla wanted to be with me just as much as I wanted to be with her. We were both young, and we both knew what we were doing. I don't regret any of it. It was a wonderful time for us, even if her parents will never understand that. I love Carla more deeply than anyone else ever could, and she knows that. But her parents just can't let go of the past. No matter what I do, or how hard I try, I'll always be the bad guy in their eyes. That label isn't going anywhere as long as they're around. Carla and I first met back when she was finishing high school in Chicago Heights, and I was in my second year at the University of Illinois down in Champaign. From the moment I met her, I just had a feeling she was the one. We became a couple pretty quickly, and it just seemed like we clicked right away. About a month into dating, we decided to take things to the next level, and after that, well, we were together whenever we could be. After Carla graduated, she lived at home with her folks and started working as a bank teller. I'd go see her almost every weekend, either at her place in Chicago Heights or at my parents' place in Oak Lawn. I was about a year away from finishing college when Carla told me she was 2 months pregnant. We made plans to get married as soon as we could, tied the knot in November, and then, like I said, Steve arrived 6 months later, in May. I finished my degree a couple weeks after Steve was born, and then started working airport security at O'Hare. Carla stayed with her parents until I had graduated and found a job. Once we had our own apartment set up in Des Plaines, we finally moved in together the weekend after I graduated. It felt amazing to finally have our own little family together under one roof. For the next 8 years, life was pretty great. Our jobs got better, we bought a house, Steve was growing like a weed, our relationship was strong, and our family was close. We welcomed Lori, and both kids kept us on our toes. We felt happy, lucky, and things only seemed to get better with each year, more promotions, more money, more good times. But I guess I need to get to the real reason I'm telling this story, because that happiness didn't last forever. Not too long ago, I went through some of the toughest months of my life. It all started with something small. Carla and I had been arguing about who was the reason neither of us could get a decent night's sleep. I said she snored and woke me up, she said the same about me. Carla refused to believe she snored at all. But I've got to say, when she does, it's this soft little squeak that can wake me right up, and then I'm lying there, listening to her, waiting for it to stop so I can get back to sleep. I know I snore too. I've caught myself a few times. So sure, I can see how she loses sleep as well, but it just felt like I was being blamed again, like I was back in the hot seat with her parents, and I didn't like it. So, I decided to have a little fun and brought home a voice-activated recorder from work. I set it up on the nightstand and joked with Carla that we'd finally settle the score about who was making all the noise at night. The next morning, we both woke up together, shared a kiss, and rewound the tape. Right away, we heard my snoring, loud as a chainsaw. Carla pointed at me, grinning, and said, "See what I have to put up with?" But then, in between my snores, we could both clearly hear her squeaky snore, too. Carla's eyes went wide with shock, and I just couldn't help but laugh. She said, "Oh my gosh, I'm terrible." We both started laughing, and she said, "Honey, we're going to have to work on this together, or one of us is going to end up sleeping in the guest room." I told her, "Yeah, you'd better do something about that squeak." I was just glad I wasn't the only one getting blamed anymore. She gave me a playful whack on the arm and said, "Sorry for blaming you, honey. I see now we're both guilty." I pulled her in close, and we shared a warm hug and kiss. I'll admit, things got a little affectionate, but she didn't mind. By the time we finished, the kids were up, and before we knew it, we were both running late for work. Naturally, the recorder got forgotten for a few days. Then one day, Carla called and asked if I could come home early to watch the kids because she had a meeting at the bank. After she left, I spotted the recorder and remembered our little experiment. Curious, I rewound it and started listening. Hearing our playful morning banter made me smile, and then, as I listened on, my mood changed completely. What I heard next hit me like a freight train. On that tape, I heard my wife with another man, right there in our bedroom. There's really no easy way to say it, she was unfaithful to me, and she brought someone else into our home. Once I realized what was on that tape, I called our neighbor Judy to ask if she could watch the kids for a while because I had a work project that needed my attention. She agreed, and the kids were happy to go play with Judy's children, who were close in age to ours. When I got back upstairs, I sat down and kept listening to the recording. What I heard was gut-wrenching. I heard Carla talking to this man, Steve, about how much she missed him, and about things no husband should ever have to hear. Their words made it clear that this wasn't some accident or mistake, it was something that had been going on. Carla even joked about wanting all the kids to have the same father, while Steve made comments about how I never suspected a thing. Carla told him she cared about me, that she never wanted to hurt me, and that what she had with him was just about passion and excitement, not love. But the damage was done. I sat there, listening, feeling crushed. It was clear she'd been keeping this secret from me for years. That was the moment everything changed. My world as I knew it fell apart, and I knew things would never be the same. The rest of that tape was exactly what you might imagine. It was filled with the unmistakable sounds of two people lost in a moment of passion, things I really don't want to picture, and honestly, I'd rather not describe at all. Even now, it's hard for me to let my mind go back there. But I listened to every second. I heard everything Steve did with Carla that afternoon, and I could hear how much she enjoyed being with him. There were things in her voice, in her laughter and words, that I'd never heard before in all our years together. It struck me that maybe I'd never made her feel that way. Suddenly, it felt like my whole marriage had been built on a lie. Everything I'd believed about our love, the trust between us, the closeness I thought we shared, it all just fell apart. How could she truly love me and still do what she'd done? How could she give herself to me completely, like she always said, when clearly her heart wasn't all in? She always said she never held back in our relationship, but after hearing that tape, I realized that wasn't the truth either. There were things she shared with him that she'd never let me experience with her. Honestly, words don't do justice to the way I felt after I'd heard it all. I was completely shattered, heartbroken, sick to my stomach, and angry beyond belief. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I was disgusted, humiliated, furious, and scared all at once. There are just too many words for it. But if I had to pick one, devastated sums it up pretty well. But if there's one thing I wasn't, it was clueless. Carla once said I wasn't stupid, and she was right. I knew I'd have to figure out what came next, for myself, for my kids, for the future. First, I realized I needed to make a copy of that tape. Something told me it would be important to keep proof of what I'd found. The recorder had a double tape feature, so I set it up to duplicate everything from the first tape onto the second. I slipped that copy into a manila envelope and hid it in the trunk of my car. No matter what else happened that day, I knew I'd have that recording safely stashed away. Second, I knew I had to keep quiet about what I'd learned, at least for a little while. I rewound the tape back to just after our little snoring experiment and erased everything after that point. Then, I put the recorder right back on the nightstand where it belonged and left the room. If Carla happened to get suspicious and wanted to check the recorder, she'd find nothing out of the ordinary, no hint that I'd discovered her secret. I needed more facts before I could decide what to do. I figured the best place to start was the beginning, back to when I first met Carla. Since I met her through one of her friends from high school, I thought maybe her old yearbooks could give me some clues or help me piece things together. So I headed down to the basement, dug around until I found the box with all our high school yearbooks, and took them, all of them, both mine and hers, and put them in the trunk of my car along with the tape. I put everything else back exactly how I'd found it, so nothing would seem out of place. If she did notice the yearbooks were missing, I could just say they probably ended up in a different box. Finally, I knew that if I saw Carla that night, she'd know right away something was wrong. So I called my boss, Jim, for help. Over the years, Jim had become a good friend, someone I could trust with something this serious. I explained what was happening and asked if he could cover for me for a few days, so I could figure out what to do. I asked him if he could set up a fake trip for me, like one of those anti-terrorism training courses in New York. I'd taken similar classes before, so this wouldn't raise any red flags for anyone. Of course, I had no intention of actually going to New York. I just needed time and space to sort things out. Jim agreed to help. He even agreed to play along and say this was a last-minute assignment, something urgent that came up, and that I had to catch a flight right away. I called Carla on her cell and told her about this supposed urgent trip for work. I explained that Jim had called me in a panic and I had to leave immediately. I said I'd drop the kids at Judy's, pack, and get going as quickly as I could. I told her I didn't have all the details, but I'd call her once I knew more. She wasn't happy about me leaving so suddenly, but I told her my hands were tied. As I hung up, she told me, "I love you, Don," but I didn't say it back. She probably noticed, but I just couldn't bring myself to do it. After that, I took the kids to Judy's place and explained the situation, telling her Carla would pick them up in about an hour. She was okay with it. I asked if I could bring Steve and Lori home with me for a bit while I packed, just so I could say goodbye. She agreed, so we headed home. Lately, I'd been following the news about that Stephen Avery case up in Wisconsin. He'd spent almost 20 years in prison for crimes he didn't commit, until DNA evidence finally proved his innocence. That got me thinking. I realized I needed to collect DNA samples from the kids, just in case. So when we got home, I managed to take a Q-tip swab from each of them for a saliva sample. I knew I could have their DNA compared to mine and find out for sure if I was really their biological father. I wasn't expecting good news, especially after what I'd heard from Carla on the tape. Once I'd packed a bag for a few days, I dropped the kids back off at Judy's and thanked her for helping on such short notice. I left and checked into a hotel in Harvey, a suburb far enough from Chicago Heights that I wouldn't accidentally run into any of Carla's family, but close enough for me to keep an eye on things while I figured out my next steps. After checking in, I went out and bought some beer, and, honestly, just drank until I passed out. It seemed like the only way to stop myself from running those awful scenes over and over in my head. I knew I'd feel terrible in the morning, but I was going to feel terrible anyway, so what did it matter? When I woke up, I felt like absolute hell. My head was pounding, my stomach was in knots, and it was already past 11 a.m. I didn't think I'd make it to noon. So, I did what felt logical at the time, I cracked open a couple more beers. Believe it or not, that might have been the best move, because the next time I woke up, it was 3 in the afternoon, and I actually felt a little better. I ordered some coffee and toast from room service and took a shower while I waited. The coffee hit the spot, and I managed to keep the toast down. I felt a little more like myself. After that, I checked my cell for messages. There were 3. The first was from Carla, from the night before. She was worried that I hadn't called her when I arrived in New York, and she was upset she didn't know where I was staying. She asked me to call as soon as I got her message. The second message was also from Carla, this time from earlier in the morning. Now she was really mad that I hadn't called her last night or that morning. She was clearly frustrated, but to be honest, I didn't care at that moment. I figured I'd come up with an excuse when I finally spoke to her. I knew I'd have to call her eventually, but I wasn't in any rush. She was already upset, how much worse could it get? Then I laughed to myself, realizing that with wives, there's always room for more upset. The third voicemail was from Jim, and it came just a few minutes after Carla's calls. He let me know that Carla was pretty fired up and demanding answers about where I was and what was going on. Jim said I owed him for all the hassle she gave him on my behalf, and I had to agree, she really put him through the ringer. Jim told her he didn't know which hotel I'd ended up in, so he couldn't give her any more information than she already had. He also told her that my seminar would be at a conference center by JFK Airport, and if she wanted to try and reach me, she could start there. But, honestly, if you've ever dealt with airport security, you know how it goes. She could spend forever making calls and never find me, even if I really was there. And since I was nowhere near New York, I figured I was safe for the time being. With a couple hours before Carla got home from work, I decided to focus on my own little investigation. I grabbed my laptop and started working down my checklist. First, I wrote out everything I already knew. Then, I made a list of all the details I was still missing and needed to fill in. I pulled out Carla's high school yearbook and made a note of every single person who'd written anything in her junior and senior yearbooks. I cross-checked the names by class year to see if any patterns popped up. Next, I called her old high school and asked if they had a booklet from her 5-year reunion. The admin on the phone was surprisingly helpful and mentioned they not only had the 5-year one, but the 10-year reunion booklet was coming up soon, too. I asked if she could send them to me, and she offered to email a digital copy, which made things a lot easier. Just a few minutes later, I had a fresh list of names and details. I started matching up yearbook names with married names, addresses, phone numbers, even things like hobbies, pets, and favorite foods. Pretty wild, the amount of info people send in for those reunion books. I saw that Carla herself had submitted an update, mentioning our 2 kids and even adding a note that we might be expecting number 3 soon. By this time, Carla would probably be home from work, so I figured I'd better call her back and just face the music. I knew she'd be upset, but I couldn't avoid her forever. If you've noticed a more cynical edge in my words lately, you're not wrong. At this point, I really wasn't feeling too concerned about how she felt. After everything, I figured she could deal with a little sarcasm from me for a change. So, I called her. She answered right away, and sure enough, her first words were, "Don, where the heck have you been? Why didn't you call me last night or this morning? What is going on?" I wasn't surprised, honestly, I'd braced myself for this. I let her vent for a bit before I responded. I told her it was late when I got to the hotel, and I didn't want to call and risk waking the kids. I also said I was feeling down and just ended up drinking too much, and by the time I got up in the morning, it was too late to call before classes started. I told her the hotel situation was tricky, that I'd only managed to get one night at the Hilton Garden Inn by JFK and would have to find another place for the next couple nights. I told her she should just keep calling my cell if she needed to reach me, but that I wouldn't have it on during the seminar. That way, I'd have some control over when I spoke to her. I realized I'd need to be more anonymous while making my investigation calls, so I decided to pick up a prepaid cell phone from a pharmacy nearby. I got a track phone. It was cheap, untraceable, and perfect for what I needed. By the time I got back to the hotel, it was almost 6 in the evening, and I realized I was getting hungry. On the way back, I spotted George's Rib House and figured a good meal was just what I needed. Back in the hotel, I got right back to fact gathering. I went through Carla's senior yearbook again, page by page, noting down everyone who'd left a message and the nature of their comments. I made a simple code for each, M for male, F for female. If they seemed to be friends, I wrote friend. If it looked like they were close girlfriends, I marked girlfriend. For more personal or romantic comments, I marked boyfriend. If the message was negative, I wrote non-friend. When I was done, I'd made a list of about 40 names, 30 females and 10 males. I sorted the names by gender and then by the type of relationship. In the male group, I found 5 marked as boyfriends, 4 as friends, and 1 non-friend. One of the boyfriends was a guy named Steve Wilson. I was pretty sure he was the other man, but I wanted to be certain before jumping to conclusions. That non-friend, a guy named Gil Roberts, looked promising as a potential source of information. Maybe he held a grudge or didn't like Steve. On the female side, I marked 3 as girlfriends, around 25 as friends, and 2 as non-friends. The 3 girlfriends had even been in our wedding, so I planned to avoid them for now. Some of the friends and definitely the non-friends might have details to share. Funny how people love to talk when they're not too fond of someone. I matched up my notes with the reunion booklet, adding in any details I could, married names, addresses, phone numbers, where people worked, even hobbies and the names of their kids. Not everyone filled in every blank, but there was a lot to go on. The more information I had, the better chance I had at getting the full picture of Carla's past and figuring out exactly what had happened. By the time I finished, it was after 10, and I was exhausted. I decided to call it a night and get an early start in the morning. Maybe I could even wrap up my digging by the end of the day. I got ready for bed, hoping I could finally get some rest. Just as I was turning down the covers, my phone rang. It was 10:30 p.m. The kids would be asleep, and Carla was probably winding down for the night herself. I answered, curious to see what she'd say. "Hi Don, I thought maybe you'd call tonight once you were settled in," she began. "Well, I considered it," I replied. "But last time I called you, you bit my head off. Figured I'd wait and see if you wanted to talk." She apologized for snapping at me earlier, explaining that she'd just been frustrated about not being able to reach me. She said the whole trip felt strange and admitted she was feeling insecure. "Will you forgive me?" she asked. That one caught me off guard. Forgiveness? I didn't say so, but that wasn't coming anytime soon. I kept things vague. "I'm sure I'll get over it in a couple days. Don't worry about it." "That doesn't really sound like forgiveness, honey," she shot back. "Maybe I'm just a little upset myself, after the way you treated me," I replied. She didn't say anything for a while, and I honestly didn't care if she suspected something or not. Maybe she was thinking about the choices she'd made. I hope so. After a minute, she said, "Well, I guess I'll let you go then. Don, I'm sorry. I love you." I said, "I'm sorry too. Good night, Carla." I could hear her start to cry as she hung up the phone. I didn't sleep well, but at least I didn't have to listen to her squeaky snore. Even that made me sad. Remembering the morning we laughed together about it, and how close we felt then, hurt even more, knowing how things had changed. That feeling stayed with me until I finally drifted off. The next morning, I got up early and set right to work. My plan was to dig up everything I could about Carla and myself. Using the track phone, I called several of the women on my list, introducing myself as Roger Moore from Homeland Security. I explained I was running a background check on Don Phillips as part of his possible assignment to the Chicago Area Anti-Terrorism Task Force, and that he was married to Carla Peterson, whom I believed they knew from high school. I asked all sorts of questions about Carla's high school associations, and in the end, I got what I was after. Steve Wilson was, in fact, her high school boyfriend. They'd dated for about 3 years, breaking up a couple months after graduation. I learned that Steve still lived in Chicago Heights, worked at the Chase Manhattan Bank as a loan officer, and was recently divorced himself. Turns out he had 2 boys of his own. As I flipped through the reunion booklet, there he was, Steve Wilson. He really was a good-looking guy, I'll give him that. I could see why women would notice him. Honestly, part of me wished I looked half as sharp. But the facts were still the facts. Carla broke things off with him and married me. She gave her innocence to me, not to him. But later, she'd ended up with him anyway, keeping that relationship going for years, and apparently letting him be the father of our kids. Why did she do it? That was the question that kept running through my mind, over and over. Maybe she could explain it to me, but right then, I sure couldn't figure it out. So, after Carla and I got together, she stopped seeing Steve in a romantic way, but they kept working together at the bank until we moved out to Des Plaines. Looking back, I could see how being around each other every day might have brought old feelings back, but that still didn't answer the why. Once I'd talked to enough friends from the old days, I decided to try one of the people who wasn't a big fan of Carla, Jill Marker. I gave her the same story about running a background check, then came right out and asked if there was anything about Carla's past that might affect a security clearance for her husband, Don Phillips. The second I asked, Jill unloaded. She told me Carla was the biggest troublemaker to ever walk the halls of Chicago Heights High School. According to her, Carla was a boyfriend stealer, a cheater, and someone she'd never trust. I pressed her on where all this came from. Jill told me she'd dated Steve Wilson in her sophomore year, and that Carla stole him away. She admitted boyfriend stealing wasn't illegal, but said it showed Carla's true colors, and that those same traits came out later after Carla married me. Jill claimed there were plenty of rumors, many started by Steve himself, that Carla had gotten back together with him once they worked at the bank. He supposedly bragged that he'd gotten her pregnant and that their affair had never really stopped. He was even boasting just that week about putting another bun in the oven. Whether or not it was all true, Jill made it clear she wouldn't trust me for a security clearance just because of who I was married to. What I didn't expect was how much it would sting to hear someone else talk about my family like that, knowing I'd been blind to it for so long. I figured I'd better check with the other 2 non-friends. The next was Steve's ex-wife's sister. Her story lined up almost the same. She told me her sister divorced Steve after hearing rumors about his affair with Carla, and when she confronted him, Steve just admitted it. He even bragged about having 2 extra kids. I asked for her sister's number, and she gave it to me without hesitation. The last person was a guy who'd had a crush on Carla all through high school. He said Carla always claimed to be in love with Steve, but wouldn't marry him because he was too full of himself. According to him, Steve tried to win her over for 3 years, but Carla held back, saying she'd only give herself to her future husband. Still, this guy said Carla once told him that after she lost her virginity, maybe Steve would get another chance for old time's sake. It hurt him to hear that, and he eventually gave up on her, realizing she'd probably never be loyal to anyone. All of this hurt me more than I could have imagined. It seemed like Carla never really planned on being faithful, even before we met. I honestly felt sick to my stomach. By then, I'd gotten what I needed from my list of contacts. Now I needed a closer look at Steve himself. I stopped by the bank where he worked, just to see him in person. I didn't introduce myself or let on who I was, just watched from a distance. He looked as impressive in real life as he did in the photos. Tall, athletic, and confident. It was almost a shame he'd turned out to be such a jerk, otherwise, he could have been quite a catch. There were still a couple more calls and errands on my list, but I planned to be back in Des Plaines before the evening. Once I wrapped everything up, I checked into the Candlewood Suites near the airport. That night around 8:30, I called Carla and told her I'd be home around noon the next day. I suggested she take the afternoon off so we could have some time alone together. By now, I was pretty numb to the whole situation, so I kept my voice normal, didn't give her any clue what was going on. I figured, after all her lies, a few of my own wouldn't make much difference. I told her I loved her and that everything would be fine. I said I'd see her tomorrow. For the first time in a while, I actually slept through the night. The next morning, I stopped by my office and had a long talk with Jim. He wanted to know what I'd found out, so I filled him in. He handed me an overnight envelope from the DNA lab. I'd sent off the kids' DNA samples for testing, paying extra for a rush job. I was relieved the results had come back so quickly. I opened the envelope with Jim there, since he was both my friend and my boss, and, frankly, I knew I might need his help down the road. The letter was clear. The lab had tested 5 samples, 2 boys, 1 more boy, and a girl. Samples 1 and 2 were full brothers, and so were samples 3 and 4, a brother and sister. Samples 1 and 2 were only half siblings to samples 3 and 4. As for sample 5, that was me, there was no DNA connection between me and any of the other samples. In plain English, none of the children were biologically mine. I'd also called Steve's ex-wife and asked if I could talk to her. She agreed and let me take saliva samples from her 2 boys. I even had her sign a statement confirming she'd given the samples willingly. Jim gave me a big hug before I left and told me how sorry he was for everything I'd discovered and for what I was going through. He said he'd back me up, whatever I decided to do. Then he tried to lighten the mood, joking that with my thorough investigation, I might be after his job next. It was about the only thing that made me crack a smile that day. With all my evidence, the recording, classmate statements, Steve's ex-wife's letter, the DNA lab results, and my broken heart, I drove home to finally face Carla. I walked in a little before noon, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat in the family room, waiting. Not long after 12, I heard Carla come in from the garage. She hurried over, ready for a hug and a kiss, but I pulled away. She shot me a confused look, but I knew things were about to get a whole lot worse. She asked, "What's wrong?" I just asked, "Want a beer?" She shook her head. "No. Just tell me what's going on." "Carla, I know you've been having an affair." She tried to speak up, probably to deny it, but I just raised my hand and cut her off. "I don't want to hear anything right now. I know what's been going on, and I have proof. After that, why would I believe a single word you say? So please, don't insult me with another lie. Just have a seat on the sofa and listen to what I have to say. That's all I need from you for now. No talking, no tears, no excuses, no apologies. Not yet. None of that matters in this moment. I just want you to sit and listen." She went pale, and I could see real fear in her eyes. I asked again if she wanted a beer or maybe just some water. She managed to say she'd take some water. I brought her a glass, then sat down in a chair across from her so I could look her straight in the eye. "Carla, I know about the affair. I want you to understand, I've got more than enough evidence to back it up. I'm telling you this because from now on, I expect nothing but honesty from you. If you try to cover things up or play games, it's only going to make things worse for both of us. Trust me, you don't want that. I'm going to leave the house today. I'm packing up what I'll need for the next month, and I won't be living here during that time. We'll still be husband and wife in name, but I won't be staying here." She gasped a little when I said that, and I could see her trying to hold back tears, but she kept quiet. "While I'm gone, there are 2 things I want you to focus on. The first is deciding if you love me and want to keep this marriage going. No matter what my decision is, your answer matters just as much. I don't want an answer today. I want you to take a month, really think about it, and then let me know. Not before, not after, 1 month. Second, I want you to write down the full truth about your betrayal. The woman I married and loved isn't the same person I see now. If there's any hope for us, I need to know who you really are. That means telling me everything, who the affair was with, or if there was more than one person, all their names, when it started, where it happened, how often, why you did it, what you got from it, every detail. Don't leave anything out, Carla. No matter how much it hurts, I need to know. If you lie to me, even about one little thing, that's it. I'm done. But if you can be completely honest, there might still be a chance, no guarantees, but a chance. Don't expect more than that." She looked panicked now, and I could tell she finally understood just how serious I was. "If you decide you can't, or won't, tell me the whole truth, let me know at the end of the month and we'll end this marriage as quickly and painlessly as possible. It's in your hands now, Carla. All the decisions for the next month are yours. When you've made up your mind about us, send me an email at my work address, and attach your written explanation. I expect both, exactly 4 weeks from today. One more thing, if I find out you ever go back to your affair, that's it, we're done. Understand that. Now about the kids. Do you want them with you for the month, or should I take them? Either way is fine. If you want them, I'll see them every Wednesday night. I'll pick them up from the sitter and bring them back by 8:30. I'll call when I arrive so you know they're home. Every weekend, I'll take them one day, you decide which day and let me know. If you'd rather I have the kids, then you can pick them up on Wednesdays and spend one weekend day with them. Whatever works best for you. I'm going to start packing. Let me know what you want to do about the kids before I go. With that, I left the room and headed upstairs to pack a couple bags. I could hear her sobbing downstairs, but by the time I came back, she'd pulled herself together, at least on the surface. Her eyes were red and her makeup was smudged, but she seemed more in control. She started, "Don, I know you don't want to." "Stop," I snapped. "You're right, I don't want to hear it. Either do what I told you or let's just end this marriage right here, right now." Up to that point, I thought I'd kept it together pretty well, but when she didn't seem to understand how serious things were, I lost it. I had to let it out. She jumped at my outburst and just hung her head. "Do you want to keep the kids, or should I take them?" She choked out, "I want them with me." "Fine. I'm leaving. I'll call you tomorrow to set up the schedule for seeing the kids on Wednesdays and weekends. Goodbye, Carla." And with that, I left. The months seemed to go by faster than I expected. I took Steve and Lori out to dinner every Wednesday and spent time with them at my hotel. Lori was still little and didn't really know what was going on, but Steve was old enough to sense something was wrong. He asked me why I wasn't home, and I told him that his mom and I were having a grown-up problem and needed some time to figure things out. I told him he shouldn't worry, that we both loved him and his sister very much. He seemed okay with that answer, at least for the time being. I saw Carla each time I dropped the kids off. She'd always come to the door to greet them. Once, she tried to come talk to me as I pulled away, but I just held up my hand to stop her and drove off. After that, she stayed at the door and just watched us leave, usually wiping away tears. Exactly 1 month to the day after our talk, I got an email from Carla. It read, "Dear Don, I want you to know how sorry I am that you've been hurt so badly. I love you, and I want to be your wife. Please call me after you read my letter and decide if you'll come home to me. I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I need you, and your children need you. Love, Carla." Reading those words, I knew Carla wasn't going to tell the whole truth in her letter. I realized she wasn't going to admit that Steve and Lori weren't really my children. So even before I read her story, I already knew what my decision would have to be. But, of course, I had to see what she wrote. Attached to her email was a long letter. This is what it said. "Dear Don, I'm writing this letter hoping you'll come home to me. I love you so much and I want to stay your wife and grow old with you. That might sound simple, but what I have to tell you is far from simple. I know what I'm about to share will hurt you, and that's the last thing I ever wanted, but you asked for the truth, so here it is. Don, the truth is, I love 2 men. I love you, and I also love Steve Wilson. You called what I had with Steve an affair, and by most people's standards, you're probably right. But for a long time, I just didn't see it that way. When I think of an affair, I think of a short-lived, passionate fling, something secretive and temporary. But what I had with Steve went back much farther and ran much deeper than that. As you know, when I met you, I was already seeing someone else, and that person was Steve. He and I started dating when I was a sophomore in high school. Steve was charming, good-looking, funny, smart, and caring. He really seemed to have it all. Not long after we started seeing each other, I realized I was in love with him. Honestly, I thought he was everything I could want in a boyfriend or even a husband. But there was one thing about him that I knew would always be a problem. He was so confident and charming, I just never believed he could be faithful as a husband. That's why, even though I loved him, I wouldn't let our relationship go further. I always believed that I would save myself for the man I married. Steve tried, believe me, but I wouldn't give in. Then I met you. It didn't take long before I realized I loved you, too, and you were the kind of man I wanted to spend my life with. You were attractive, kind, thoughtful, smart, funny, and genuine. I could tell you'd be loyal and true to me. You had every quality I wanted in a husband, and I truly loved you. But here's the part that's so hard to explain, I never stopped loving Steve. It was a different kind of love, but it was real, too. I know that's confusing, but it's the best I can do to describe it. Even after you and I started seeing each other, Steve didn't give up. He kept trying to convince me to be with him. During the week, I'd see him, and on the weekends, I'd see you. Steve knew about you, and he knew that my feelings for him hadn't faded. I once told Steve, almost as a joke, that maybe after I gave myself to my future husband, I'd let him be with me before I got married. I don't know if he took me seriously or not, but he remembered. After you and I became intimate, Steve could tell something had changed. He kept asking for that chance I'd have promised. We weren't married or even engaged yet, but even though I knew you were the man I wanted to marry, I eventually gave in to Steve. I wanted to be close to him, too. I gave myself to him and, in that moment, I let myself enjoy it. That's when I got pregnant. Deep down, I knew the baby was Steve's, but I wanted a life with you, not with him. Looking back, I can hardly believe what I did to you. But I did it, and I have to own that. From that point on, I was unfaithful to you. When I told you we were having a baby, you married me. You never questioned if the baby was yours because you were the one who took my virginity. Steve looked like me, so there were no red flags. But I didn't stop seeing Steve. Even after we were married, we'd find ways to meet up once a month or so. I kept loving both of you. You've always been a wonderful father to Steve and Lori, and a great husband to me. I loved you so much, and my love for you just kept growing as the years passed. I know this probably doesn't help, but my feelings for Steve never grew. I loved him the same, but my love for you became so much bigger. I even hoped, for a while, that maybe you would be unfaithful to me, just so I could somehow justify my own actions, but you never did. You were everything I could hope for in a husband, even if I didn't deserve you. I know I'm stalling. Here's the rest, as you asked. Who? Steve Wilson. Why? Because I loved him. Where? All sorts of places, at his place, sometimes at our house, sometimes hotels or motels. Sometimes at restaurants, parks, even in cars. We just made it work wherever we could. When? I can't give you all the dates, but it was about once a month, sometimes every other month, for all these years. What? We were intimate, we shared moments, we talked, kissed, hugged, and yes, did things I never did with you. Sometimes I tried things with him, like things he wanted, even if I wasn't sure I wanted to, because our time was limited. I thought it was a small thing to give, considering I was living my real life with you and only seeing him in passing. Other facts: Steve got married once, but it didn't last. He cheated on his wife with me and with other women, just like I always feared he would. His wife found out and left him. He wanted me to leave you and marry him, but I always refused. I told him he'd never be faithful and that I couldn't trust him that way. I know that sounds so wrong, expecting loyalty in a husband when I couldn't be loyal as a wife. I'm so sorry for that, Don. There are two more things I have to say, and I know these will hurt the most. Steve is Lori's father too. And, Don, I'm pregnant again. I'm pretty sure it happened the last time I was with Steve. That means all three of our children are Steve's by blood. I did it that way on purpose. I wanted them to be true siblings, so there'd never be a question. But Don, you are, and always will be, their real father. You're the one who's been there for them, who's loved and raised them. Steve's never even met them, and he doesn't want to be their dad. I don't want him to, either. I want you to be their father. Carla closed her letter by saying how sorry she was for all that had happened and for the pain she'd caused me. She wrote that if she could undo everything, she would. She said she was praying I'd give her a chance to fix things, to save our marriage, and that she hoped I loved her enough to want that too. She promised to answer any questions I still had and said she was waiting for my call. The next day was Friday, so I called Carla and told her I'd be home early the following morning. I asked her to take the day off from work and to drop the kids at the babysitter's, since we had a lot we needed to discuss. She agreed, and when she asked what I was thinking, I just told her she'd have to wait until tomorrow to find out. The following day, I walked into the house. Carla was waiting in the kitchen, holding out a cup of coffee for me. I took it and suggested we sit at the table, since I had a lot to go over. Once we were both settled, I opened my briefcase and set down a stack of paperwork and folders. Carla, I said, this is all my evidence. I pointed to the audio tape. It started with this. That's how I found out everything. The tape proved you were seeing Steve, and it made clear just how deep this went. It revealed you'd been cheating on me since before we were married, and that neither of our children are biologically mine. You planned to get pregnant again by Steve, just so I'd raise another one of his kids. You even spent time with me right after being with him. And yet, you always told me you wanted to be with me, not him. Carla looked stunned, like she couldn't believe I'd figured it all out. If you're wondering where the tape came from, it's from the recorder we used for our snoring experiment. After I heard everything, I erased all but the snoring part so you wouldn't realize what I knew. I never actually went to New York, I told her. I stayed in Chicago Heights, researching your past and learning who Steve was and whether the kids were really mine. That's why you couldn't reach me, because I wasn't where I said I'd be. Once I learned the truth, I couldn't face you. I had to leave before you got home. Then I pulled out her old high school yearbooks and set them on the table. I thought the best place to start was your yearbooks. I made a list of everyone who wrote in them and organized them by how they knew you. Here's what I found. I showed her the cross-referenced list, then the reunion booklet. This was emailed to me by your high school. I used it to track down people from your past and get their current contact info. I learned a lot from Jill Marker, Steve's ex-wife's sister, and even a guy who had a crush on you in high school. He said he stopped caring about you when he learned you'd been unfaithful. Most of your friends and classmates know what happened. I don't know how you ever expected Steve to keep quiet, he never did. Next, I opened a folder containing the letter from the DNA lab. This letter proves I'm not the biological father of either of our kids. I also contacted Steve's ex-wife, got DNA samples from her 2 children, and had the lab confirm that Steve and Lori are half-siblings to Steve's boys. Finally, I took out one last folder, closed my briefcase, and set it aside. That's all the evidence I have right now. I'm sure there's more out there if I looked, old receipts, keepsakes, who knows what else. But honestly, I don't think I need anything more to understand what's happened here. She quietly shook her head, agreeing. I don't want to hear details about your relationship with Steve. I'm not the kind of man who wants to hear about that, and there's no reason to relive any more of it. Your letter matched the facts I gathered. For once, thank you for telling the truth. Carla, I loved you completely and gave you everything I could in our marriage. I truly believed you were giving me the same. When I realized that wasn't true, that our whole marriage was built on lies, I knew I couldn't live that way anymore. I won't pretend I didn't feel angry. For a time, I thought about finding Steve and confronting him. But I know that isn't the answer. I just want to move forward. All through this, I watched Carla's face go from shock to fear and finally to deep sadness. The pain was clear in her eyes. Even after everything, seeing her like that broke my heart all over again. I opened the last file on the table. Carla, these are divorce papers. I've already signed them. There are also papers here giving me full custody of the children, including your unborn baby. The panic in her face was unmistakable. It was hard for me to watch, but after everything, I felt I had no other option. I'm not going to rush to file these unless you force my hand, I told her. If you cooperate, I won't throw you out. But we won't be living as husband and wife anymore, at least for the foreseeable future. I'll expect you to move into the spare bedroom, while I stay in the master. As for Steve, I expect him to pay child support, $2,000 per year, per child, deposited into trust accounts for each of them until they're 18. That includes the new baby, too. Right now, that totals $30,000 in back payments and for the next year. I'll also require that Steve take out a $108,000 life insurance policy, with the children as beneficiaries and you as policy owner, just in case something happens to him. When his obligation is met, ownership of the policy goes back to him. If he refuses to comply, I'll take legal action and force the issue through the courts. I have all the evidence I need to make it public if it comes to that. He'll receive a letter from my attorney, along with all the evidence I've collected. Here are your options. 1. You can leave at any time, but not with the children. You're free to go. 2. You can sign these papers and stay here with the kids, though we won't be living as a married couple. I doubt you need a lawyer, your choices are pretty limited, but if you want to speak to one, I'll give you until Tuesday morning to do it. One last thing, you can never see or talk to Steve again. If you do, and I find out, there will be serious consequences for both of you. You've lost me, and you've lost Steve. Don't make another mistake and lose your children, too. That's everything. Do you want to sign these papers now, or wait to see a lawyer? Carla looked absolutely defeated, and I took no joy in seeing her like that. But I felt I had no other option, considering the circumstances. She simply said, "Yes, I'll sign them now." And with that, she signed the divorce and custody papers. I put them in my briefcase and told her I was headed to the bank to store them in my safe deposit box. I said I'd be moving back into the house on Saturday morning, and I expected her to have moved her things to the spare bedroom by then. I told her, "Goodbye, Carla. I'll see you tomorrow," and left the house. The next day, I moved back in and settled into the house again. Carla had already moved her things into the spare bedroom, just like I'd asked. Life just kept rolling forward. On the outside, everything in our home seemed ordinary. Carla and I spoke politely to each other, shared meals, played with the kids, and even laughed with them when they did something funny. To anyone else, we probably looked like your average family. But the truth was, there was no trace of real closeness left between us. There were no glances, no quiet conversations, no signs of affection. I didn't touch her, and I made sure she didn't touch me either. Time moved along, sometimes dragging us with it, and sometimes running us right over. I spent plenty of nights lying awake, thinking about what we'd lost and wishing it could all just fade away. But it never did. It hung over us, day after day. I knew Carla struggled too. More than once, I heard her crying quietly at night in her room. There was a time when that sound would have torn me up inside, when I would have done anything to make her smile again. But I'd changed. The pain and disappointment hardened me. There were nights I'd lie in bed realizing just how much I'd lost, not just my wife, but a part of myself too. I didn't feel her pain anymore. Most nights, I could barely even feel my own. Over the months, Carla tried more than once to talk about what she'd done, hoping we could somehow fix things and find a way to be happy again. But I told her, straight up, that I didn't want to hear any more details about her betrayal. There was nothing she could say that would make it right, nothing that could undo the past. Every time I turned her down, she seemed to shrink a little more, and the crying from her room would go on through the night. Of course, her pregnancy kept moving forward through all of this. One Friday morning, she called to say she was in labor. I hurried home, took her to the hospital, and a few hours later, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl. I was there with her, through the labor and delivery, even held her hand as she brought Gracie into the world. Carla asked what I wanted to name the baby. I told her Grace, so we could call her Gracie. She looked at me, surprised. Grace was her mother's name, and she knew I wasn't exactly close with her parents. She asked if I wanted Gracie's middle name to be Louise, after my own mother, joking about Gracie Lou like in the movies. I told her no, I didn't want my mother's name, and that she could choose any middle name as long as it had nothing to do with me or my family. Her face fell, hurt and shocked, but I just walked away. I could hear her sobs echo down the hallway as I left for home. The next day, Saturday, I went to visit Gracie. She was perfect, and in just a couple of minutes she had me wrapped around her little finger. I fell for her completely. It was strange, how could I love another man's child so much? It happened before with Stephen and Lori, but back then I didn't know the truth. This time, I knew, and it still happened. Sunday, I went to the hospital to bring Carla and Gracie home. Carla's parents were there in her room when I arrived. Her mom, Grace, looked at me and demanded to know why I hadn't visited Carla the day before, even though I'd been there to see Gracie. I waited, hoping Carla would say something, but she just looked away, tears in her eyes. I was frustrated. She never defended me, not even now. I told Grace, what I do or don't do isn't your business. If you want answers, ask your daughter. She fired back, telling me I had no right to talk to her like that since she was my wife's mother. I looked at Carla again, still nothing from her. So I said, well, maybe we should change that. Carla's head jerked up, finally, and she spoke up. Mom, Dad, that's enough. It's time for you to go so Dawn can take us home. Her father couldn't resist one last jab. Listen, son, that's no way to treat your wife's parents. But I should have expected as much from you. I shot back, don't ever call me son again. I never was, and I never will be. Now please, just leave. Driving home, Carla apologized. Dawn, I'm so sorry about that. I told her, why be sorry, Carla? Your parents have never liked me. They've never respected me. They always thought you married beneath yourself. You've let them think that all these years, you've never once stood up for me. Now I know why. You never really respected me either. That started before we were even married, and it's gone on every day since. Time went on, and I stayed busy. I had a DNA test done for Gracie. It showed she was Steve's child, as expected. But that didn't change how I felt about her. I loved that little girl as much as anyone could. When she smiled up at me, my heart melted. That bond was sealed the first time I saw her in the hospital, and it would never change. I spent more time than ever with Stephen and Lori. I tried to be the best father I could, and I loved them more every single day. Steve Wilson might have been their biological father, but I was their dad in every way that counted. Life with my kids was as good as it could be. They adored me, and I adored them. The only thing missing was the woman I'd loved, Carla. I'd often think back on what we had, how much she'd meant to me, and I'd realize how much I still missed her. Sometimes, I'd break down and cry. I also made a choice I'm not proud of. I used my connections to get a tap on Steve Wilson's office and home phones. Yeah, I know it was wrong, but I wanted the truth. What I learned wasn't a surprise. Carla had called Steve to let him know he was a father again. Hi Steve, this is Carla. What are you doing? Carla? You know you're not supposed to contact me. What if Don finds out? Oh, he won't. I'm using a pay phone at the mall. He'll never know. I just wanted you to know you're a father again. Her name's Gracie. You make beautiful babies. Steve answered, I'm glad she's adorable. So, when do you want to start working on the next one? He laughed. Carla said, You know I can't do that now, Steve. Don and I haven't been together since he found out, so there's no way. Steve replied, You must be missing it then, huh? When do you want to get together? Carla replied, I do miss being close to you, Steve, and I wish we could meet up, but I just can't risk it right now. I'm still hoping that maybe, somehow, Don will forgive me and we can put our marriage back together. After that, maybe we'll see if there's a way to meet up from time to time, but I don't think things will ever be the way they were. Don is a lot more watchful than he used to be. Steve answered, Just know I still think about you, Carla. If you ever want to see me, I'll make it work, anywhere, anytime. Please stay in touch. Carla finished, I will, Steve. Goodbye. Take care, I love you. If you think hearing that phone call made me angry or broke me, you'd be wrong. By that point, after everything that had happened, there wasn't much left in my heart that could be hurt. I'd become completely numb to Carla. As far as I was concerned, she just wasn't a part of my life anymore. Every ounce of love I had left was focused on Stephen, Lori, and Gracie. They got all of it. There was nothing left for Carla, nothing she could ever do to get it back. If I hadn't had my kids to care for and love, maybe things would have turned out differently. Maybe I'd have lost myself in work or in a bottle, or maybe I would have tried to rebuild the marriage. But that's not how it went. My kids were my world, and that was enough for me. A few months passed, and then Steve Wilson died in a car accident. No one saw it happen. His car left the road and hit a tree. The report said his neck broke on impact. There were a few other injuries, but the broken neck was the cause of death. Carla found out about Steve's passing when she tried calling his office and someone new picked up the phone. I still had the phone tap going at that time. Hello, this is Jonathan Davis. Oh, I was trying to reach Steve Wilson. I'm sorry, Steve Wilson doesn't work here anymore. May I ask who's calling? I'm just an old friend. I'll try his home number. The man paused. Ma'am, I'm afraid this might be a shock, but Steve was killed in a car accident about 3 weeks ago. You might want to reach out to his family for more information. I'm very sorry to be the one to tell you. I could hear Carla gasp, completely stunned, and then the call ended. That night, when I came home, Carla looked at me strangely. I acted like everything was normal, and she didn't mention a word about it. But I heard her crying in her room that night, and for several nights after. Not long after that, she got a letter from the insurance company with a claim form for Steve's life insurance, listing the kids as beneficiaries. She brought it to me, asking how to fill it out. After we mailed it off, she gave me that same look. She said, You didn't look surprised when you found out Steve had died. I told her, Carla, I don't have any feelings about Steve anymore. I'm not shocked, I'm not upset. The only thing that matters to me is making sure his children are provided for. That seemed to shake her, and she kept looking at me like she didn't recognize the man I'd become. A week later, the insurance check arrived, $108,000, just like the policy stated. Carla and I took it to the bank and deposited the money into each child's college fund. Each of them got a good share, and with the interest that would grow over the years, I knew their education was covered. By the time Stephen was ready for college, he'd have around $80,000. Lori would have close to $100,000, and Gracie about $130,000. It was a big relief knowing they'd have what they needed for their futures. On the drive home, I commented that at least we didn't have to worry about paying for college. That was one good thing we could count on. When we got home, Carla asked if we could talk. I said sure. She wanted to know if I'd ever forgive her, if I could ever love her again. I shook my head. No. She called me cold-hearted. I told her she was probably right. She wanted to know how I could be so distant. I told her that I hadn't always been this way. It was what she'd done to me that changed me. With the kids, I was still myself, still warm and loving, and she agreed that she'd seen that too. Then, to my surprise, Carla asked me if I had anything to do with Steve's accident. She said she knew, from the moment she heard, that I was involved. I simply nodded. She asked, why? I told Carla I'd tapped Steve's phones, both his work and home lines, and that I'd heard her calls to him. I told her I'd listened as she told him about being a dad again, and how she hinted that maybe, after some time, they could see each other again. I said it was obvious she'd never really loved or respected me, that she'd used me for years and would have kept doing it if she could have gotten away with it. She looked at me and quietly asked if her story would end the same way. I nodded. I told her it was just a matter of time. 2 months later, Carla couldn't take the waiting anymore. She ended her own life. And I cried. I cried because Stephen and Lori cried. Seeing their little hearts breaking shattered mine, too. But the truth is, I didn't cry for Carla. She'd been gone to me ever since I first discovered her betrayal. But I wept for my kids, because their pain was too much for me to bear. Carla left me a letter, tucked away in a place only I would find it. Dear Don. I'm so sorry. I loved Steve, but not the way I loved you. You were everything to me. I know my choices destroyed your love for me, and now I can't imagine going on without it. I hoped you'd forgive me someday and that we could be happy again. I see now how I turned you into someone cold. When I realized what had happened to Steve, I knew then you'd never look at me the same, and I just couldn't live with that. I'll die knowing I ruined a good man. Maybe you weren't the perfect husband for me after all. What I needed was someone who could accept my flaws, even my selfish wish to be loved by 2 men. That's not something any man should have to live with, and I'm not blaming you. I should have let go of Steve's love, but I couldn't. I pray that my death will set you free from the anger that has changed you. I hope, someday, you can forgive both yourself and me. I see the real you when you're with the kids, that loving, caring dad they adore. When you look at them, I hope you see a piece of me, and maybe love me a little more through them. I'm sorry for this last goodbye, Don. I just can't do this anymore. I love you. Carla. This time, I cried for real. It felt like the burden inside me finally lifted, just as she'd wished. I cried for the friend I'd lost, the one who would never laugh or cry with me again. I cried for the woman I'd loved, who would never hold me or love me again, and for the mother of my children who would miss out on all their milestones, big and small. I cried for the emptiness inside me, the place where hate had taken over, and where now there was just a quiet sadness. I cried for the life I'd once imagined with Carla, knowing it could never be replaced. And, finally, I cried for myself, for the person I'd let myself become in the midst of so much pain. After that, I quietly destroyed her letter. I went to the bank and gathered all the evidence of her affair, except for the DNA results, which I kept only in case the kids ever needed them for medical reasons, and destroyed it. No one else would ever know unless there was a reason tied to the children's health. In my will, I set up a medical trust for the kids, with instructions that the DNA results be kept sealed, opened only if it could help with a hereditary illness. I decided I'd do everything possible to keep Carla's memory positive and intact for her children and her family. No one else needed to know what had happened between us. I never denied Carla's parents the chance to see their grandchildren. They loved the kids, and the kids loved them back. I knew her parents probably blamed me for their daughter's death. There was something in their eyes that said so, but to their credit, they never said a word about it. I think they understood it was best for everyone to just let it be. Little by little, the emptiness in my heart started to fill up again, with love for my kids, and even with the good memories of Carla. For all that happened, she'd made me happy for 8 years, and I finally realized I didn't want to erase that. In time, I even learned to forgive myself. It wasn't easy, and it didn't happen fast, but it happened. I had 3 wonderful children who needed their father. And that's what mattered most. Epilogue. I found myself sitting in the front row, watching Stephen walk proudly across the stage at his high school graduation. The school board president, Leslie, as it happened, handed him his diploma, gave him a big smile, and then wrapped him in a hug. Right behind Stephen in line was her daughter, Jennifer, who got the same diploma, the same proud smile, and a hug from her mom. Stephen and Jennifer had been together ever since their first day of high school, 4 years earlier. As I watched them walk off the stage, hand in hand and looking so grown up, I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Tears welled up in my eyes, not just because of what Stephen had accomplished, but because I knew Carla would have been so proud too. Both Stephen and Jennifer were heading off to the University of Illinois at Champaign that fall. There was no doubt in my mind those two were going to light up the place together. They were madly in love, and anyone who saw them could tell they were meant to end up together. Carla would have absolutely loved Jennifer. After the ceremony, Stephen and Jennifer made their way through the crowd to find me. They both gave me huge hugs, and I couldn't have been prouder. They'd both graduated with honors and were standout athletes. Really, their futures were as bright as could be. Stephen asked if it was okay for him and Jennifer to stop by a couple of graduation parties before coming home, and of course I told him that was fine. Jennifer gave me another hug and said, "Thanks, Dad, we'll see you and Mom later." I caught myself thinking about those words, her calling me dad. Over the years, I really had become her dad, too. Leslie, her mom, and I had first met right after Stephen started high school. She was the president of the school board, always involved with school events, and Stephen was always telling me what a great mom Jennifer had. Eventually, we crossed paths at a football game. I'll admit it, I felt like a teenager all over again the moment I met her. It turned out Leslie was a single mom, divorced since Jennifer was 9. Her ex-husband had walked out and never looked back. After the game, I asked Leslie if she'd like to grab coffee, and she said yes. That was the beginning for us. We started spending more and more time together, and about a year later, we got married. I love her with all my heart, and she loves me right back. For a long time, I didn't think I'd ever find happiness in marriage again, but I did. For the past 3 years, we've been a real family. Leslie loves Stephen, Lori, and Gracie as if they were her own, and I love Jennifer like my own daughter. If life has taught me anything, it's that biology isn't what makes you a parent, it's love. When Leslie and I got serious, I made sure she knew everything about my past. I told her all about Steve and Carla, and even the parts I'm not proud of. She was surprised, sure, but she saw the truth in me. She saw that whatever anger and darkness had once been there was gone for good. She told me she wasn't worried about our future. Now, life together is amazing. I have a new partner, a best friend, and a woman who fills my days with laughter and hope. My heart is full, with love for Leslie, for our children, and yes, there's still a little room for gratitude for the good times I had with Carla. After all, she gave me these wonderful kids. Stephen has grown into a handsome young man. Sometimes, he reminds me of Carla. As he gets older, he even resembles his biological father a bit. Lori and Gracie, though, are the spitting image of their mother, beautiful, full of life, and so much like Carla that I can't help but love her a little more every time I look at them. As the kids got older, I made sure to tell them about their mom, about the woman I once loved, and how much she loved them. I wanted them to know her for who she was and to remember her fondly. Just then, Leslie came up to me and pulled me out of my thoughts about the past. She asked where Stephen and Jennifer were off to, and I told her they were going to a couple of parties before heading home. She smiled and whispered that if I hurried, I could take her home and maybe we could get to work on that baby I'd promised her. Didn't take us long to get to the car and head home. Life is good, and, honestly, it just keeps getting better.